Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to chair this session. So first, let me introduce our speaker today. So let me briefly introduce Professor NGUYEN. So he's a lecturer in English language at the Huy University, and he earned his PhD at school education, the University of Queensland. And his research interests include language teaching in third world context, global policy in foreign language education, and social aspects of language testing. And he's currently head of the English Department and Academic Affairs of the Huy University College of Foreign Language in Huy City, Vietnam. Okay. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor NGUYEN.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I consider myself not as an expert on the CEFR, though. I mean, there might be a lot of people interested in the CEFR, and a lot of research has been done in Vietnam context, and I happen to be one of them. So today I'm very happy to be risked and invited to the conference so that I can share some of my opinions, some of my research findings that I have conducted during my PhD projects. My PhD project is on the CEFR and how the policy is was played out in Vietnam context. And during the time of conducting this research project, we were in a kind of a very sensitive period of implementing the policy. There were a lot of anxiety and concerns and debates and a lot of questions in mind. And so I decided to focus on this research, and I tried to understand how the CEFR was adapted in Vietnam. I agree with Professor Tonos when he said that there are three types of the CEFR as a global language policy. It could be adoption, adaptation, and creation. And in the case of Vietnam, I think it's also, I don't know if it belongs to which type of borrowing, or it could be partial adoption. I think it doesn't fit well into the adoption type. Would be that kind of partial adoption. I will clarify that. One of the things caught my attention is that this comment from Reynolds, when they say that the impact of the CEFR together with the companion volume has grown to previously wholly unforeseeable levels. And it is in Asia that the CEFR has found its most adherent followers, and the impact and influence is likely to increase, especially in Asia. So that is interesting. Why in Asia? Why we have a lot of adherent followers here in Asia? I know that the CEFR has been borrowed and implemented in different polities, different places and countries, both inside Europe and outside Europe. But the question is that in the context of some countries, like in Vietnam, is it just a happenstance? I borrow this word from Byron Papenta in their book in 2012. They say some of the encounters with the CEFR is maybe it's just by chance. Somebody knows the CEFR and they introduce the CEFR to the policymakers. We don't know. There might be a lack of systematic introduction and understanding of the CEFR before it was borrowed in one specific context. I think that might be the case in some contexts, like in Vietnam, for example. But then we know the CEFR through a project. And the project is called Project 2020. Later, it is known as the National Foreign Language Project in Vietnam. This is a very big project, and it's aimed to enhance the foreign language proficiency levels of Vietnamese people, especially English. The CEFR was introduced in this project, and it's in 2008. And after that, 6 years later, a local version. I would use the word CEFR-V, but I'm not sure that it could be a local framework or not. It could be a kind of a partial adoption, as I mentioned. The global reference levels were adopted, as some global descriptors were adopted and translated into Vietnamese, but it was not adapted, it's not borrowed in its entirety. It's not borrowed the CFR as a 254-page document. So in 2014, we have a policy to issue the local version of the CFR in Vietnam. And in 2015, we have an effort to increase the influence of the local framework by using a testing mechanism called Vietnamese Standardized Test of English, or VSTEP, are now used to categorize learners into different level of proficiencies using the common reference levels of the CFR. So that the policy also mandates that all school leavers will have to reach a minimal level of English proficiency based on the CFR reference levels. And all eligible teachers have to reach, or should reach, I wouldn't say the word have to, but should reach a minimal level of English proficiency in order to be able to teach students at a particular level of proficiency. Usually teachers are required to be 2 levels higher than their students. For example, if you want to teach the students at level 1 or A1 of CFR, then the teachers would have to be at sometime able to attain the level of B2, for example. In this presentation, I'm not going to look into the situation or the impact or the current assessment, evaluation of the CFR implementation in Vietnam, but I'm trying to look at the social-cultural context that precedes the adoption of the CFR, because I think that somehow contextualized the decision to adopt the CFR in Vietnam. So it's all we try to use the documents, the governance documents, so that we can understand. I'm not sure that we can have a good understanding, but a better understanding of the decision to adopt the CFR in the Vietnam context. So I'm going to elaborate on at least 3 social-cultural conditions that contextualize the decision to adopt the CFR in Vietnam. According to our analysis and assumptions, we're trying to frame the adoption by referring to 3 conditions. First of all, the changes in the language policy related to English education in Vietnam. The second one, we talk about the need for reform or innovations in higher education sector in Vietnam. And the third one, I'm trying to look at the tendency for administrators to look outwards for solutions to domestic issues. So these are the 3 contexts, I would say. I would use the word context that underline, underline the decision to adopt the framework in Vietnam. Then in 2008, 2010, 2014, when the framework was adopted. So first of all, let's look at the table here, and I'm trying to highlight the fact that in Vietnam, the foreign language policies has been shaped by its national, the nation relationship with other countries. And you can see here there are shifts and changes happens during the course of history in Vietnam, with the Chinese and then French and Russian present in the landscape of foreign language education in Vietnam. But it's not until here, after Vietnam was trying to adopt a market-oriented economy, then the English became an important foreign language subjects at all levels of education. We have 3 milestones here, and I try to highlight these 3 milestones. The first one in 1993, the government decided to issue what is called guidelines for practical English language education curriculum. And this one is one of the first significant foreign language policy in Vietnam. It categorized learners into 3 broad levels, that is elementary, intermediate, and advanced. In 1994, we also have another important policy. We call that National Strategy for Foreign Language Teaching and Learning. According to this strategy, English became an obligatory subject for universities nationwide. And then until 2008, Vietnam becomes more deeply engaged in the global economy. So we felt the need to upgrade the level of proficiencies among learners, and we decided to issue and to have this national foreign language projects, as I mentioned earlier, and that is the time when the CEFR came into place, and that is the time when the CEFR was officially introduced in the landscapes of language education in Vietnam. So this adoption of the CEFR by the National Foreign Language Project is considered to be an effort to adopt a Western model of teaching and learning to fix the problems in English language education in Vietnam. And the authority hopes that by adopting this framework, there will be a more concrete platform to initiate curricular as well as language testing reforms with higher levels of learning outcomes. And it is hoped that the resulting standard of English language competence would be higher, and it would enable young Vietnamese learners to compete for jobs in the global market. So that's one of the contexts that we believe that contextualize decision to adopt the CEFR in Vietnam at that time. The second context we would like to highlight is that the need for economic as well as political innovations and efforts to reform higher education. So in the period between 2011 and 2013, we have some sort of freshness in terms of policy making. We have an encouragement of critical debates, especially the critical debates online regarding to policy making, policy dissemination, and policy discussion. So within that context, we have the discourse of reforms across many sectors, including higher education, English language education, was highlighted. And in 2005, the government declared a reform agenda known as Higher Education Reform Agenda (HERA). It's trying to focus on the aim of adopting international standards and trying to promote global competitiveness. So the effort to adopt the CEFR in Project 2020 or the National Language Projects might be an effort to advance the aim of rigorous reform in education. And we believe that this embracement of international standards and foreign pedagogical products is one way of facing many challenges, the lack of competence in foreign languages in Vietnam at that time. So that could be another context underlying the adoption of the CEFR in Vietnam that we have observed through the governance document. And the last context, we think that there seems to be a tendency from the administrator's point of view. They tend to look outwards for solution to domestic issues. Of course, we understand that Vietnam policy in Vietnam, the kind of policy borrowing has been embedded in the history of colonialism, and we have constant influence from major foreign powers. Because of that, the Vietnamese people developed important lessons to make the most of their colonial legacies and to understand what is to retain, what is to ignore, what is to adapt. So I believe that could be one of the what is the underlying context that would somehow explain the adoption of the CEFR at that time. The authority have decided to take a more proactive approach to look outwards, so that they can solve the issues of teaching and learning foreign languages in Vietnam at that time. But the thing is that the CEFR is as Professor Toro has mentioned, is not a simple document. Sometimes I find it's very hard to read, to understand, and to grasp the main philosophical implications of teachings and learning in the document. So it's very sophisticated. It also subject to interpretation and reinterpretation. And this is where we believe that complication begins. So a superficial adoption of the global common reference levels, or an adoption of the CEFR without further research and changes to fix in with the local context will be very hard, and it would be difficult to be successfully implemented. So that is some of the underlying context that I would like to highlight in this presentation. And of course, through that, you can see could be some of the potential challenges I will try to present to you later on. But first of all, there are good outcomes. I think that the situation in Vietnam since 2008, when CEFR was first adopted, and now the situation has been better. I mean, the quality of teaching, the effort to reform the system and to boost up the efficiency of the system has been significantly improved. And because the framework has been adopted in a top-down manner, so it has been consistently done through different levels of education from the top to the bottom. And also we can see that because of the using of the high-stakes testing mechanisms, such as the VSTEP, the national, the CEFR-based standardized testing that I mentioned earlier, it is used to set standards for learners, and it could generate swift and widespread influence of the CEFR, or the local version of the CEFR in Vietnam. It also has triggered alerts and critical awareness among key stakeholders, including teachers and students, while the framework, the local framework, and their own language performance. And in some way, this is a well-intended, deliberate message from policymakers to address the urgent issue of insufficient levels of language performance among Vietnamese learners. But the challenges are there. Some of the challenges have been mentioned and proposed by me and my team, and some of them are mentioned by some other researchers in the field in Vietnam. But then one of the things that we can observe is that there's a lot of debate among educators related to the adoption of the CEFR until now. And I believe that debate is good for an informed decision-making related to the CEFR, but it also shows that the controversy of the adoption, usually a top-down attempt to implement the CEFR, such as in Vietnam context, it causes confusion, sometimes misconceptualizations of the CEFR. This one is mentioned by Nagai and their colleagues in the publication related to the Vietnam context. Some of the scholars, researchers also mentioned the minimal level for learners based on the CEFR levels are a little bit ambitious, and maybe it's not achievable for some students in some areas of the country. And because it has a lot of challenges, it seems that the adoption of the CEFR is not fully considered and not really based on scientific evidence. So it could be, in some way, it could be considered as a quick fix solution. Also, without, considering its contextual constraints, it might be an abrupt, hasty decision. And since the CEFR companion volume was issued, then the adoption of the CEFR at that time of the decision was outdated, because now we also have the companion level volume, which I think there's significant changes related to what we call mediation and ruralism. It's also important for us to look at when we adopt the CEFR framework. And also, the local frame, somehow it's aimed at all foreign languages in Vietnam, but mainly, in reality, it's mainly reduced to English education only. So some of the macro level challenges could be mentioned related to this adoption. At the micro level, classroom level, it seems that the adoption of the CEFR and its common reference level is low. Its discounters have led to a kind of over dependence on the materials that are already there by some famous publishers. So it could be a kind of challenge for teachers and learners in Vietnam until now. Although we have some local CEFR aligned materials published by local publishers, but still, on the whole, you can see some sort of over dependence on these ready-made materials. But we also do not have some pedagogical tools that promote learner-centeredness. We understand that CEFR trying to promote the learner autonomy and learners as social agents, but it seems like the tradition of teaching foreign languages, including English in Vietnam, still one step behind. We do not have the tools, such as the portfolios, the e-portfolios, to promote the self-study and learner-centeredness in teaching. We do not have an adequate number of contact hours. It's constrained by the curriculum. There's mismatch between the assigned textbook and the CEFR-aligned outcomes, low levels of student proficiency at the entry level, and also there are significantly different levels of awareness, of understanding and practice of the Vietnamese teachers of English. Of course, as Professor Tono suggested, I think for this kind of policy to be implemented successfully, there should be training, there should be somehow effective communication between the policymakers and the teachers and the learners at the micro level, classroom level, so that they can not only adopt the materials, adopt the reference levels, but adopt the philosophy underlying the teaching and the learning. Some of the, what I would like to say, ways forward, some of the considerations that might help us to move forward in Vietnam. As in my own opinion, I think it's important to think about setting feasible CEFR-based learning outcomes. This is somehow one of the key important aspects of adoption of the CEFR, because we adopt wholesale 6 levels of proficiency, where I know in some contexts they're trying to make it further in details, maybe more than 10 levels, so that there should be a more accurate ways of categorizing learners into different groups. So here, for example, I would like to use my Hanovit citation in 2013 to say, we need to consider realistic expectations. We need to have proper planning for an implication for teacher training, curriculum development, and issues to ensure issues of equality and social justice. We also need to address the tension among local actors to decide what extent the CEFR levels are international standards or whether they are local standards under a new name. This is a tension. I think this is something we need to bear in mind. Because as mentioned by Nagai, it's ironically that the CEFR is used for the creation of a local standard precisely because it provides a global measure. However, the more local the standard is, the less global it becomes. So it's a kind of tension for people at the site to decide to what extent it could be global, to what extent it could be global or local. The last thing I would like to mention is that we need to exercise caution in turning the CEFR into what we call common Asian framework or common world framework or any kind of name you can come up. But we need to look into consolidated research-based understanding of the locality where this global framework would be enacted with new location, new skills, new actors, new organizations. And I believe this is an important message for policymakers to consider. So that is my presentation for now. I have to leave now. I hope you can understand it. Thank you. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Professor NGUYEN, for his fascinating introduction of the background and the practice of CEFR in Vietnam. Thank you.